What is up, you guys? Welcome to the Twink Revolution. I'm Sam.
And I'm Gian.
And we're here with very special guest, journalist, filmmaker, and DC correspondent for Behind the Headlines, Dan Cohen. Welcome.
Thanks, guys. How you doing?
Good.
So we're super excited to have you here. You've just written a new piece for Mint Press News about the, it's entitled How a U.S.-Backed Coup in Serbia Inspired the DC Insurrection. And we'll definitely link to the piece in the description so people can go just read it. But be super curious. I mean, it's a fascinating piece. And could you maybe tell us just briefly, what is that connection?
Well, so I was at the riot, insurrection, call it what you will, for a few hours. And my first thought when I got there was this looks remarkably similar to, all the color revolutions, the US backed coups that I've seen, around the world, and old videos you've seen, and, storming the Capitol and all this stuff, except, they don't have the support of US empire behind them, and they don't realize that that's kind of a necessary thing. So a few days after, maybe a week after the whole thing went down, I basically came across a flyer for the Oath Keepers, which is basically just a right-wing paramilitary composed of former cops and former military veterans. And, they say they're defending the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. And so in this flyer, they say, we're going to stop a coup from happening to President Trump. And there's this section. First, it says what President Trump must do to stop the steal or stop the coup, which is kind of hilarious because they say he has to do, among other things, one of them is do what Hillary Clinton did and just deny and just say the election was stolen. So, which is true. I mean, that's what she did, and what the entire kind of liberal press did is just say that Russia stole the election and that's why Trump was president. And then under that it says what we must do, and then it has this quote, this series of quotes and a video from what it calls an unnamed Serbian patriot who also loves America. And it says it lists off you have to storm the Capitol. And then, it says we also set the media building on fire or attack the media building. And so, pretty remarkable little similarity there with storming the Capitol. And then there's a whole video of him. It's a 20-minute video of this Serbian guy just talking about the events in Serbia, in Belgrade in 2000, when the U.S., the Clinton administration, backed a coup against Milosevic, who, in the middle of election. We can get into the details of what I found what actually happened there. But so this video, I managed to identify this Serbian guy, and he's a 20s, I can't remember how old he is, but late 20s, early 30s scientist, who just for whatever reason loves America. He's clearly right wing, but he has this really bizarre obsession with the United States and with Trump. He was very into Jordan Peterson, which is kind of funny. And also he got his information from Project Veritas, which I didn't write in the article, and I should have. But so this video that he made gets somehow he started a BitChute channel in November or October, September, a few months ago, and he starts uploading these videos, and they get a few views. But somehow one of the Oath Keepers came across it, and he didn't say if he had sent his video to the Oath Keepers or what. He didn't really detail. I got in touch with him. But so this video gets placed in the Oath Keepers propaganda, and then this huge YouTube channel called Mr. Guns Gear channel, and it's his B channel. He has two, and it's still enormous. It has like hundreds of thousands of followers, where they do like, instruction for how to like, use this gun and that gun and all kinds of like it's just like paramilitary, right-wing military veteran stuff, with kitschy American flags and all this stuff. And so this video goes viral and gets like something like 250,000 views there. From there, it gets picked up on by the top QAnon account on Twitter, Code Monkey Z, which was eventually suspended like after January 6th, and Twitter ended like 70,000 accounts, QAnon accounts, I guess. That was one of them. And then a bunch of other, it just like through the whole right-wing media sphere, especially like QAnon and like the real hardcore of Trump's base of support. And I even found a video of the top GOP official, top Republican official in Arizona, Kelly Ward, talking about it at a Stop the Steal rally in December. So, it had a real impact on how, at least some portion, a pretty significant portion of these people who participated in like the more hardcore element of the riot, who actually stormed the building, and their kind of support, how it had a real impact on them. So like basically what it demonstrates is like, the U.S. empire turning inwards, the color revolutions that it has sponsored, around the world for the last 21 years, I guess, have now, those tactics are being like turned on, American. Oh, you can't. That's right. We're not doing video, so you can't see my my air quotes, but American democracy.
Yeah.
So, I think it was like obvious to a lot of anti-imperialists, but like actually seeing how it went down and documenting it just really was mind blowing for me.
Yeah, the imperialist element of this conversation is just so interesting. I think you were the first one to kind of point that out, because I never really thought about it. No one really seems to like talk about it, but
it's sort of the chickens coming home to roost narrative gets wheeled out. But this is literally it. It's happening.
Yeah, but in the video of Alexander Savage, the Serbian guy, you mentioned he discusses a bunch of tactics they used to conduct the regime change against Slobodan Milosevic. I'm curious, like, what were those tactics he expressed, and which ones were on display during the Capitol events?
Right. So he talks about a couple of things. One, storming the Capitol, which obviously happened. I would say, it's hard to say what the exact intent of the, whatever coup mongers who stormed the Capitol here was. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't really doubt that that some of them, not all of them, but there was probably some hardcore contingent that wanted to, get some lawmakers. I mean, there's videos of people chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," this sort of thing. Obviously they didn't get to any lawmakers, and there's a lot of media reports, that they would have. Some of it comes from, the FBI. So there's questions about, how much is the FBI ramping this up in order to, assert its own agenda. But I think it's safe to say that there are some who would have wanted to do bodily harm, either capture, do bodily harm, kill, certain lawmakers. I don't know. But, in Serbia, they basically stormed it, set it on fire, and then took started ransacking the place. So basically, he says, Savic, the Serbian patriot, says, he specifically calls for violence, for one thing. So, that's important. And that, the thing is, it's not in that viral video. It's in another video, which also got a bunch of views on his BitChute, but, he doesn't specifically, explicitly call for violence in the one that went viral. Nonetheless, people are, you're dealing with people who are, prone to violence. So, the kind of difference is Savage totally discounts all of the factual, evidence that the whole Otpor movement which is what he is talking about, which I'll explain, was basically financed and trained by the United States, by the U.S. Embassy, by the CIA, the U.S. government. It was just a project of the U.S. government. So Otpor is basically the student activist part of the anti-Milosevic opposition that began really in earnest in 1998 when the U.S. was, trying to figure out how exactly it was going to, have regime change in Serbia. And what it decided is, we're going to have this whole, kind of AstroTurf uprising that looks like a totally grassroots concept. And so they took all the anti-Milosevic opposition, all these fragmented parties, none of which were popular, and they just stuck them together. It's just stick them all in a room, and you all have to figure out whatever stupid differences. Who cares? Just all you got to do is commit to working together to get rid of Milosevic. And then out of that, the student contingent was called Otpor, and it basically was run like an intelligence operation where the leaders that the U.S. had groomed and trained, they were not public faces at all, because the U.S. really wanted to de-emphasize its role in this whole thing. And so, they were extremely organized, obviously very well financed. And one of the things they did at the behest of the U.S. was go and monitor the voting polls in Serbia. And so basically what happens when the first round of voting goes down is Otpor says, the opposition, the whole US-backed opposition says, our guy has won outright. He got a big enough vote to win outright. And the Federal Election Commission says, no, it's not an outright victory, even though the Milosevic came in behind. So there has to be a second round of voting. So I don't know what the truth is, and I'm not sure that anyone does, and I'm not saying that, absolutely the Milosevic government was truthful in this, but the point is, because of U.S., interference, you can't really trust the U.S. side. That's definitely, that's absolutely the case. And so then you have all this confusion, and Otpor and its whole network descends on the capital of Belgrade and leads these protests and ends up using a bulldozer to break through police lines. They had already basically gotten collaborators within the police to allow them to get through some roadblocks that the government had ordered the police to put up. And so you have these mass protests. The government is basically paralyzed. They storm the Capitol. And then, the next day, and then they go take the bulldozer to the media building. And the next day, Milosevic is realizing, I just have no way of winning. So he just concedes and congratulates the his US-backed opponent. And that was, there was also another strategy called the Matrix Project, which the U.S. basically was putting pressure on members of the Milosevic cabinet, people closest to him, to flee the country, which was successful in a lot of ways. It's something that the U.S. has replicated in Venezuela that failed. It attempted in Venezuela, after the announcement of Guaido as, interim president, that whole thing. It's attempting the same thing. There's talk about the U.S. attempting that in Russia right now. Doesn't seem to be working, with the whole Navalny thing going on. And then, so there's just huge amounts of pressure. You have the whole power of the U.S., Western Europe, and other, basically U.S. allies, vassal states, putting this enormous amount of pressure on Milosevic. And all of that stuff, Alexander Savic discounts completely from his narrative. So he's just telling these right-wing Americans, you just have to go in and storm the Capitol and blah, 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 and be willing, and use violence, and you will win. Obviously that failed, for a number of reasons. I mean, it was a pretty haphazard effort in a lot of ways. There were elements that were very clearly organized and trained and used, military training to storm the Capitol, and some of them were very fanatical, and there were pretty fierce battles with, at least, like, not gun battles, but battles with the police. And I think on one hand, a lot of the rioters were somewhat shocked that the police didn't just like let them waltz in, even though there were some that did. So there's kind of, it happened both ways. But and I saw people like shouting at the police saying like, we stood with you all summer when, like when they were, the George Floyd protests, and they were like cracking skulls of like Black Lives Matter protesters and Antifa. And all these like right wingers were like, the Stop the Steal freaks were like, we stood with you. You're the new Antifa, saying to the cops, all this stuff. So, I mean, that's the thing that like, one of the things I point out in the article is that like the key thing that these Trumpers didn't understand is that like they're inspired, at least to some degree, by this whole Serbian color revolution, but they are invading the place, the Congress. They're invading the very place where the congressional allowance bills that sent like tens of millions of dollars to the Serbian opposition get funded. So, they just have like totally removed all of this and are just intent on like doing their thing and don't understand what's going on around them.
So, I mean, yeah, you point out there's a certain kind of weird, bitter irony there. In terms of the cast of characters who were sort of pushing that, the U.S.-backed coup essentially in Serbia, and obviously Yugoslav color revolutions and things like that. You've got people like the Clintons, Joe Biden, Samantha Power. They're still kicking around. I mean, this is still the same crew. And to the extent that, what we sort of saw maybe after those in terms of expansion of state powers, surveillance powers, police, sort of a consolidation. It's a giant gift on a silver platter, right, for an incoming, government, right, to say, oh, look, well, it was so scary how you had to come to power. better crack down, make sure that doesn't happen again. Do you think we're sort of going to see similar things here, or is there some symmetry to this situation?
Well, definitely that's the agenda that's being advanced. That's how, the Biden administration is exploiting January 6th to kind of, ramp up this, whole climate of fear. You had, they've talked about, there's domestic terror legislation they're advancing that was actually already in the works back in November when it was announced, months before this. So, I think it's basically a response to the summer, Black Lives Matter protests, where obviously the police killings of unarmed Black people are not going to change under the Biden administration, just like they were going on in the Obama years. And there's total, and Obama prosecuted one cop, where Trump prosecuted zero. And so Biden is basically preparing, this to happen again and being able to crack down on the left. And so sees this as kind of a golden opportunity in a lot of ways. There was the whole, military occupation of DC right after this happened, where it's like they shut down the entire, area around the Capitol for like huge amounts. And I mean, we're worried about, some internal attempt by the National Guard, and we're vetting everyone. And I mean, it's true that it was members of, is like former military, but I mean, the way there's, that participated in the January 6th, but there's just no way that level of crackdown of, it's basically just for show. I mean, January 6th really showed the fragility and instability of the U.S. and the U.S. empire. And it's such a key thing. The U.S.'s image is so important for its ability to operate, whether domestically or abroad, to show like we're the city on the hill, we're this model democracy that everyone should want to emulate. And it's like, actually, like, look what just happened. Like, you just had this, so much for like a, peaceful transition of power. And so then they want to like project strength, and so then it gets announced that they're actually going to be here, a lot of these soldiers, until March 31st at the early, and it's like, come on, there's nothing happening. Like, we don't need to like overplay how like crazy, it's not like there's like militias in the hills like waiting for like the opportune moment to strike. It's like, come on. I mean, so
it's kind of funny that there's yet again, just like the Obama withdrawal timetable, we're telling them exactly how long they have to wait before they make their move.
Exactly. You can't. I mean, it's like, would they actually, if there was like some nut job who was going to do something, would they actually strike on Inauguration Day? They're going to get them. Like, come on. But yeah, I mean, you don't want to telegraph your moves, so like you said. So, I mean, it's just totally ridiculous to see how what is a really pretty crazy moment has been exploited by the national security state. And so many people are drawing parallels to 9/11, and it's totally true. I mean, obviously in the aftermath of 9/11, that's where we got the Patriot Act, and that's where we got Department of Homeland Security and all these things. So I don't know. It's just like the empire is kind of eating itself alive.
Yeah. Another really interesting part that really caught my eye when like scrolling Twitter and I saw your piece was the bringing up of Yugoslavia again. Because I feel like from the collective memory past like 2000, no one even knows what Yugoslavia is anymore. That it was the first like NATO intervention where it wasn't a government entity and kind of laid the framework for all the wars postponed to it. But I'm curious, do you have any ideas why this really critical like intervention is just like completely forgotten in the broader collective memory, and like why this country, why not like any other war?
I feel like there was a lot of liberal support for it. For one thing, it wasn't like Iraq where it was like, bad George Bush, Republican, like neocon where it's so obvious, which is collective, basically there's almost nobody that says Iraq was a good idea. Even the neocons say like, well, it was just like done poorly. Like we just did a bad job. But even like, Yugoslavia was a project. It was a Clinton administration thing. And, even like prominent left-wing figures, one that comes to mind, Bernie Sanders supported it. I'm doing research for another documentary, and like one of the more progressive figures I've have come across, who argued, it's on Colombia, and this guy argued against arming Colombian death squads. Paul Wellstone, he was like a progressive figure from Minnesota. He supported it, and it's like it was a democratic project, basically, is I think what it was. And so now, it just isn't in consciousness of like the American left in the same way, and it really should be, because it really set the model for what color revolutions would be. And I mean, the same people the same people are in power now. Samantha Power, who is in the Clinton administration then, is now Biden's head of USAID. So I mean, there are so many important lessons to be taken from the destruction of Yugoslavia, and also what a huge crime it was, and how many people died and suffered as a result of it. And the former what used to be Yugoslavia is now it's a lot of these countries are just in not in good shape. Decades later. I mean, I don't know. I talked to friends there. Lily Lynch helped me out a lot with the piece, and she was, because I don't really know a lot about Yugoslavia, and she was or Serbia, and she was like a great resource. And she kind of talked about how young people are leaving because they just don't see any future there. And that's basically, you can just trace that back to the U.S. Economic warfare, the NATO war, and the color revolution.
Yeah, it's amazing So I'm just old enough to remember just this sort of wall-to-wall coverage. I guess it was sort of perfectly corresponded to the rise of sort of 24-hour news channels, whereby, Clinton proudly ordering the planes in to go just start bombing the shit out of some country, right? And it was always like, because it was such a long, slow breakdown and a series of, aggressive moves by the US and the EU in terms of, starting from whatever civil wars we were backing. And it was just sort of a giant smear of history, capped off perfectly right by, some fluorescent lights beating down on Slobodan Milosevic in The Hague. And like, well, we got him, folks. It's so strange. People would defend that war to the end. And you're like, no, it's maybe it's just 9/11, just memory holder from people or something. I don't know. I don't know what happened, but it's horrible. And so anyway, very glad you're talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a total crime that's just total. It's been memory hold and still it's not like ancient history. Like it still has an impact on a lot of people's lives today. And, the same crooks are in power.
Well, changing topics only slightly. As you mentioned, you were hanging around the Capitol, and we've reported to you to the FBI, of course.
Cool.
Dangerous insurrectionist.
Oh, there's someone at my door.
Yeah. So, but I mean, there has been many thousands of column inches and much breathless coverage about who were the people. Are they petty bourgeois boat dealers? Are they white supremacists? Are they literal Nazis? It's a little hard, right? When we're thousands of miles away looking at the coverage, and if you sort of see even on the ground footage, it's not necessarily one thing. But there's there was weird, like there was South Vietnamese flags, EU flags, rainbow flags, a little bit of a muddle of ideologies expressed through flags. But what's your take? I mean, obviously, I guess you if you were there, you probably aren't able to authoritatively answer. But what is your take on what was the composition of these people?
I mean, if it were like 100 people that participate in it and they were all like Proud Boys or whatever, I would say, yeah, you can call them all fascists safely. And, but reportedly there was 8,000 people there. That is a lot. And it's a minority of them that of course stormed the Capitol. And, no doubt there were extremely fascist elements. There were straight up fascist elements, the most hardcore people there. I mean, we've all seen the guy with the Camp Auschwitz shirt, and I was standing right next to that guy at one point. I didn't even see his shirt, and then I realized later. But
so who could possibly know what his beliefs are? Really.
Come on, I mean, who hasn't worn a Camp Auschwitz shirt? I mean, so there's definitely fascist elements, but when you have that many people, it's not that everyone there is some ideological fascist. It's that you have people who, actually just think they're going to like protest to stop what they think is a stolen election. And a lot of that comes down to, the fact that they got wrapped up in whatever, like a crazy lie, because there's no evidence that Biden stole the election. And the reason they're susceptible to that in a lot of ways is because they have been screwed by the status quo, by Obama's false promise of hope and all this stuff. The woman Ashley Babbitt who got shot and killed, she was an Obama voter in 2008, and then before she died, she was like hardcore into QAnon and all this stuff. I did see people talking about I saw one guy complaining to a cop that he hadn't, he didn't have any money and, all this stuff. Like he didn't get his payment, this or that. So there are people who do have like real serious concerns. Now that obviously doesn't like justify joining, some like far right movement, but like we have to understand like why on a Wednesday afternoon, Trump was able to motivate that many people to get out there. And, it's a really elite kind of liberal take that I saw all over the place saying like all of these people are fascists and they're all domestic terrorists, and this is the new threat, and like this, the CIA, former CIA director, I don't know which one I saw on Twitter last night, is like, we have to use the same tactics we used in Iraq and Afghanistan to take these people out. And it's just like, I mean, they're just doing everything possible to compound the problem and exploit it, when, the real way to address something like this is like, take the wind out of the right wing and say, like, we're going to, whatever, give people $2,000 or like $4,000 every month. $2,000 isn't enough to live on every month, let alone one time, let alone cut down to $1,400, let alone, now that's negotiable. So it's just like, when the Democratic Party is so corrupt, it's a corporate cartel, it's just owned by Wall Street and just screwing everyone, while like pretending to be, like some kind of progressive answer to like the Republican Party. No wonder people just say, like, fuck, I can cuss on this. Fuck this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Fuck this indeed.
Okay.
I did like the sort of the breathless media coverage of the terrorists was perfectly counterposed with all the videos of the like just sort of like long-haired hippie dudes just like smoking a bowl in the statue gallery. Which is also the first time I realized we the people apparently paid for a fucking statue gallery.
Right.
Clearly those
exactly.
are the terrorists.
Exactly. I mean, and like, on one hand, I don't want to minimize that there were like real, like hardcore, crazy ass, people who
Sure.
I don't doubt intended to do violence, but there's also people who are just like, this is crazy, man. And like, well, I can't believe we got in here. And
the little old lady, who the famous photo of like the slightly befuddled looking older woman holding the American flag, clutching it.
Right.
I wonder what her
Right.
policy, what her politics are there.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's such a fine line, because I feel like, you get accused of downplaying it on one hand, but then you get of what happened. And like, I will admit that like for a while I was like, at first I was like, man, I don't know, that was just some crazy shit. And then I kind of like was a little bit, once I started to see more of the videos, I was like kind of shocked, and maybe I overplayed it a little bit, but I don't know. I just think that, there's hardcore elements. There's a lot of people who just were like along for the ride and didn't intend to do violence, and that's the majority of them. And basically the national security state is, and the Democratic Party, which is kind of the same thing at this point, are just exploiting it so hard, and it's going to come back, and it's very clearly going to come back on the left, and already is.
So another big aspect of these protests was all these imperialist immigrants of like the bourgeoisie, the Iranian Shah flag, the South Vietnam flag, the Taiwan flag, the Gusanos of like Venezuela, rainbow flag.
Imperialists.
And there wasn't a lot of coverage of them, obviously, because they're not like old white men, which was kind of the narrative pushed through. But also, they're attacking the same institutions that helped give them power in those countries, or attempted power, like the Democratic Party, the ultra-rich imperialist class. What is going on there, and why is not anyone really talking about this?
Yeah, I mean, all those people just want democracy in their own countries. Falun Gong just wants democracy. No, but I mean, it's, the one thing, it's like the one thing that united everyone there, no matter how hardcore or not they were, was anti-communism. They're just, and that's like the theme. That was like the real religion. And it's, and it's like the religion of America. It's what unites all of those people there with all of the like members of Congress who were, supposedly fleeing for their lives and like, and are calling them terrorists. It's like, it's just one big freak show in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, I saw a couple of Israeli flags. I saw one guy said he was an Israeli Proud Boy and a rabbi.
Oh,
a Proud Boy rabbi, which is so crazy.
Truly a rainbow coalition.
There was a Colombian I talked to who was right next to that guy, and he said he's a Colombian. These are like an Israeli American and a Colombian American, and he was telling me how basically the genocide going on in Colombia of like social leaders, farmers, indigenous people, all these, ex-FARC fighters who like signed a peace agreement. All those people have to be massacred. It's all necessary. So, just straight up fascist. I will call that guy a fascist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, the South Vietnamese flag, there was, the Pahlavi flag of the Iranian monarchy that the US and Israel backed wholeheartedly. I didn't see any Hong Kong flags in particular, but there was a ton of anti-China stuff. And then there was one guy standing on a police vehicle that they had like commandeered right on the backside of the Capitol, right in front of the steps. And he was up there and he was saying like, brothers and sisters, millions marched in Hong Kong for months. We can do it too. Blah, blah. And it's, of course, this guy will not admit that like it was the US government. And, once again, it was Congress that was like sending money to them. It wasn't like this was during the Trump years, of course, but like it wasn't just Trump. It was Congress. It was a bipartisan effort. And Nancy Pelosi, when they stormed the Capitol, the legislature in Hong Kong, when those rioters did, she called it a beautiful sight. And so it's just like another perfect example of how like Democrats love to export, this stuff overseas, but when it comes home, then it's like, this is domestic terrorism. So I guess they like terrorism when it's abroad, and they don't like it so much when it comes home, but they still will find a golden opportunity to exploit it. What other flags were there? I mean, there were just a whole bunch of them, just all the like hardcore right wing, most anti-democratic movements that like the US supports. There were just tons of those.
This seems like a good place for us to cut in our ad read for the Shenyun production, I think. As well.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So, I think, as you sort of alluded to, right, I think all of us were undergoing this process of like, how scary is this? Is this extremely funny? Is it not? I think when it hit home for me, and maybe you feel the same way, was how quickly it started getting wheeled around to like, this is a good cudgel against the left. It's all good and well to call people domestic terrorists, but as we all know, right? I mean, who fits conveniently into that group? And it seems like it took all of about a day before the sort of crackdown on the left started, where there's condemnations of like, PSL and Answer Coalition, CNN invoking the specter of the CPUSA the time they tried a coup and things like that. Pretty chilling, right?
Yeah, I didn't even know about that. They were talking about PSL and CPU. That's insane.
That was sort of the left lib.
There was a lot of the new left and neo-lib sphere were sharing around a video of Baked Alaska, who was arrested at the PSL march against the Syrian intervention. And they're like, these people were with the coup people, and they're all the same. It's kind of like, I think there's a PSL lawyer who tried to get them onto ballot, who is now representing, I think, Trump or one of his cabinet people.
Right,
like,
an impeachment.
It's like Red-Brown Alliance is being like pushed through even harder, it seems.
Right. I didn't even, honestly, I had no idea about that. That's insane. I need to look at it. But man, it's so pathetic. I did not even know that.
I guess maybe to ask it in a slightly different way, though, is like, clearly threats of domestic terror and being able to just label people domestic terrorists is going to end up weaponized against certain kinds of speech. We obviously see it in terms of online stuff. I mean,
BDS. Yeah,
well, and who are the dangerous radicals in America, right? As you said, right, the religion of America is anti-communism. I like that phrasing. I mean, it just seems so obvious that if you just find yourself out of step with sort of bourgeois American hegemony, you are a dangerous radical, right? Does this concern you?
Yeah, I mean, there is a real thing such as terrorism. I don't deny that. And it's, what working class people experience who are, getting kicked out of their homes and don't have, health care and are starving and this kind of thing. This is like real everyday terrorism that people are experiencing And, no one will ever say that. That's just like accepted because it's part of the mechanisms built into, the capitalist system. But, with that said, I mean, it's such dangerous language to deploy because, it's obviously that the bourgeois don't have any real interest in defeating the fascists. They just want to continue to work with them to attack the left. And so it's definitely going to be weaponized, and already is. I mean, there's, been a ton of censorship of the left. Now we've seen another spike, and nobody's saying anything about it. So this whole climate of fear is being exploited, ramped up intentionally in order to like prevent any kind of, criticism of Biden. And, and it's, I think that's what we're going to be looking at for the next 4 years. And it's pretty bleak.
So another really interesting, outcome of the whole riot on the Capitol was a recent Reuters piece exposed one of the Proud Boys national chairman, Enrique Tarrio, I can probably butcher that, as a police and FBI informant, and they were involved on the Capitol siege. I think 5 members so far have been arrested. How much do we know has been known about by intelligence agencies, and what do you think there was plenty of intelligence knowing or pushed, kind of pushing the lambs to slaughter during that day? I mean, if this person's a leader in this organization, he had to at least say yes, let's go get involved, knowing what's going to happen in the end.
Right. I mean, obviously he knew. He's the leader of the Proud Boys, and when they say he was an informant, it makes it sound to the FBI. It makes it sound like he's telling the FBI what they're going to be doing, and so the FBI can infiltrate them and stop them. And the reality is, at least historically, the relationship between the FBI and the police and the state, so-called law enforcement agencies, is the relationship between them and white supremacist groups, the KKK, has been collaborative. So, there's a big question about what exactly the FBI's role in this was. I mean, obviously they knew it was, very clear what was going to happen. It was openly talked about. And so, I think that's a major question going forward. And if Henry Tarrio, his real name, but if old Henry, was an FBI informant, then it's probably safe to assume he is not the only one in the entirety of the Proud Boys. So I don't want to speculate, I don't want to speculate on what exactly was going down there, but I mean, it seems very suspicious. And I hope we find out, but the way it's being spun is, supposedly he flew into Washington, and something like the day before, after he left the airport, he got arrested, so it's it makes it look like, that the cops were stopping him from going and participating in this coup. And I'm very skeptical of that narrative.
Yeah. Well, and thankfully, all these important questions that are, actually still worth talking about a month later, we've diverted away from those. We can just talk about where AOC was the whole time. It seems a much more useful discussion to be having.
Yeah, that has dominated. It's pretty remarkable that that's now the focus of attention. And I don't know, I don't want to. It's such dangerous waters to get into, this whole AOC thing. But the point I think that's relevant is there's just no there's no political leadership from her on anything that's relevant to what people are dealing with. She basically totally bailed on universal health care and forced the vote, and was really exposed with that. And there was a really kind of cynical media campaign to circle the wagons around her. And then this happens, and there's even less attention or focus or energy on doing anything to help people in the middle of a pandemic. And so instead it becomes this whole like personal like drama about AOC's feelings and all this stuff. And like a lot of people are saying she straight up lied. I don't actually know. I don't know if she did or she didn't, but I do know that like there's like nothing happening other than just like this whole focus on we have to impeach, you know, Trump, who's now out of office, because, you know, that'll stick it to him. And like, we need accountability, but it's like, there's no accountability for like people who are actually suffering, which is like such a much bigger problem. And if, you know, the Democratic Party, you know, actually focused on that, then it would just totally, that's how you defeat the right. That's how you really defeat the right, not by like some like phony impeachment.
If only. So Dan Cohen, people can find you on Twitter at Dan Cohen 3000. What are you working on? Where can people find more of you? Obviously, the article is linked in this episode description. But what else is going on?
Yeah, I'm working on this documentary about Colombia. I was in Colombia in like the middle of December for a week and went to some kind of remote regions where there have been a bunch of massacres to kind of document some of those and investigate like what is happening there. It's just this total nightmare. I think there was a massacre yesterday, a massacre the day before, and just total media blackout on it. You know, meanwhile, we just hear about Venezuela all the time. So it's, so I got a documentary I'm working on, and then some other investigations. But yeah, I mean, yeah, check out my work at Behind the Headlines. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Cohen 3000. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Cool. Well,
Awesome.
Thank you so much for being here, and we'll hope to have you back again to talk about Colombia, maybe.
Yeah.
Definitely looking forward to it. Thank you guys a lot.
Thank
Thanks.
you.